Hello, I'm Sejal Thakrar from Smile with Shiv. We've been working alongside Duchenne UK to better understand the hopes, expectations, motivations and barriers for those who are considering taking part in a clinical trial or are currently part of a clinical trial or have previously been part of a clinical trial. To better understand these motivations and barriers, Duchenne UK in May 2017 launched a patient survey. The patient survey was intended for those that was specifically for only those that live in the United Kingdom, and also for those either living with Duchenne or direct caregivers of those with Duchenne. The aim of the results of the survey is to allow the Duchenne community to better understand the current clinical trial process, hopefully making it easier to access clinical trial opportunities and to align with Duchenne UK's broader mission and the DMD Hub's mission to ensure that all patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy have access to a clinical trial. So now I'll start off with the presentation. So in terms of an overview, we had 229 completed responses. Of those, 217 responses were used for the results. The reason why 12 were excluded, we had a number of responses that were from direct and from non-direct caregivers, so for example, grandparents, uncles, aunties. And we had a number of responses where a carer completed more than one, completed a response for when they cared for more than one adult or child. So for example, they were caring for a Duchenne child who was 13 and an adult who was 29. So we just wanted to ensure that the information was interpreted correctly. And also we had one duplicated response and we had one incomplete response. Now we'll just provide you with a demographic overview. So this slide here looks at the type of respondents by country. So the majority of respondents were from England, and there were more caregivers of a child living with Duchenne under the age of 13 from all 4 countries. We acknowledged that this was the group that was more motivated and engaged to fill out the survey, and we do acknowledge the fact that this may not be a true representation of the entire Duchenne community. In terms of the age of Duchenne, the total age range was between 1 and 47 years, and 71% were below the age of 13 years. We also had 11% of the respondents that were either a child, with either an adult or a carer of an adult, and 1% parent who'd unfortunately lost a son to Duchenne. In terms of age of diagnosis, over 50% of those questioned were diagnosed at the age of 3 or younger. Previous studies have said that the average age of diagnosis is just over the age of 4 years. As part of this survey, we cannot conclude that the age of diagnosis has actually decreased, but it is positive to see that with an increase in awareness of Duchenne, that for this particular respondents, the age of diagnosis was 3 or below 3. Now we're going to look at the main neuromuscular care centre. We're going to look at the top 10 care centres. So Great Ormond Street Hospital has the highest number of respondents, with the top 10 centres attended by 72% of the respondents, and the other 28% consisted of 27 different care centres. We then looked at main neuromuscular care centre and the shared care centre. So if we look at this slide here, for example, and if we take GOSH, which is Great Ormond Street Hospital, we see that we had 34 respondents who said that they attended Great Ormond Street Hospital. Of those, 8 people had said that they actually have shared care, which means that 24% of those that go to Great Ormond Street Hospital have shared care. But what's interesting is that we can see that those who have main care centres outside of England are those who have more shared care. So for example, if we look at Dublin here, Swansea and Glasgow, the top 200% have shared care. And within England, a high percentage of shared care are for those who attend Bristol, Manchester and Birmingham, and those who actually attend Newcastle or Liverpool do not seem to have any shared care. We drilled down further into shared care, and we can see that Newcastle is the preferred, Newcastle Institute of Genetic Medicine is the preferred shared care centre. So we can see here on this slide that a high percentage of those with shared care are on a clinical trial or have been on a clinical trial. In terms of frequency of attending neuromuscular care centres, we can see that most respondents attend their care centre every 6 months. We had some that attend it more frequently than every 6 months, and when looking further, it's those that are on a clinical trial that tend to that are attending more frequently. And when we look at those that are attending once a year, these are those that have shared care. Now we'll be looking at the specific mutation overview. So it's quite positive to see that 90% of those questioned are aware of their specific mutation. So we looked at those that were not aware of their mutation, and the majority of them are adults. We then asked, do you plan to test for your specific mutation? 12 of the respondents said no, and the reasons being they didn't know how to, they didn't know what difference it would make because they're an adult, and they didn't feel that they would actually be eligible for any trial, so there was no point them knowing. The next section looks at the Action Duchenne Registry. In terms of an overview, so the majority of respondents in all countries are registered on the Action Duchenne Registry. We asked if the respondents were informed of the registry at time of diagnosis. Over 50% were informed of the Action Duchenne Registry at the time of diagnosis. Nearly half of those questioned registered on the Action Duchenne Registry within the first 3 months of diagnosis. We were interested to see how frequently the Action Duchenne Registry is actually updated. 77%, so the majority of those registered never update their registry less frequently. The most common reasons are they forget to, they're not aware that the registry needs updating, and they have issues accessing. So for example, forgetting their password, and another reason was it's just a pure lack of time. People don't have time to continuously update the registry. However, there was a small percentage, so 18%, that said they update it frequently or very frequently. Their main motivation and the reason for updating the registry was to ensure that they don't miss out on an opportunity to take part in a clinical trial. On the previous slide, we saw that a lot of the respondents who don't update the registry because they forget to. So we looked at whether those registered do actually receive reminders or are actually prompted to update the registry, and we found that of the 112 of the 128 who responded said that they never received a reminder from the Action Duchenne Registry themselves, or they were not reminded by consultants or doctors during their checkups and their appointments, which is very important, particularly when there's been a change of medication. We asked, are you aware of how the DMD registry works to aid recruitment for clinical trials? And over 50% were aware of how the registry fits into the recruitment process. Now we'll look specifically at clinical trials. So 33% of those who responded to the question have been on a clinical trial, and 59% are currently on a clinical trial. It was interesting to see that 34% have taken part in more than one clinical trial. It's important to note here that this includes both therapeutic and non-therapeutic clinical trials. So therapeutic, for example, being protein replacement, and non-therapeutic being natural history. So it's important to see that there are respondents who have been on several trials. So now we'll look at the motivations of taking part in clinical trials. Only 9% of those who responded did not want to take part or do not want their child to take part in clinical trials. When looking at age and interest in taking part in clinical trials, we can see that older boys and men living with Duchenne and carers of young boys want their child to take part in clinical trials. And this is we'll see further along in the presentation that this is the group that appear not to be eligible for the trials. We asked how important it is for the doctors and consultants to discuss clinical trials at appointments, and we found that it's extremely important to both those living with Duchenne and those who are caregivers. It's more important at checkups, so 76% compared to 58% at diagnosis, which is understandable because at diagnosis it can be a lot to take in for the families. This slide here is quite a complicated slide, but the key message here is, the key question that we asked here was, has anyone ever explained the process of how you could enroll you or the child in your care on a clinical trial? 68% actually said that they've never been explained the clinical trial process. And in terms of the types of clinical trials interested in, the top 5 interested therapies are 1, protein replacement, stem cell therapies, followed by gene therapy, genome editing, and exon skipping. You'll see that most of the values are above 50, and that's because the respondents were able to select more than one option. Looking at travel and how far people are prepared to travel, over 50% of those who want to be on a clinical trial are prepared to travel more than 5 hours to access a suitable clinical trial. In terms of what is expected of a clinical trial, the main reasons are a longer and better quality of life and finding a drug that would work and result in a better future for others living with Duchenne. They were the top reasons. Now this section here looks at looks at those that have actually been offered a trial and they've declined a trial, and we're going to look at the reasons why. So 17% of those interested in taking part in a clinical trial have actually declined a trial. We looked at the reasons why the trials have been declined, and we separated those into 2 groups. So we looked at those that have never participated in a clinical trial, never had any experience, compared to those that have actually had experience of a clinical trial. And we found that the differences, there are differences in the reasons of why trials have been declined. So for example, for those that have never been on a trial, it's more the trial itself and the burden of taking part. So for example, the financial, the emotional impact that a trial would have, compared to those that have previously have taken part in a trial or have experience. They're more concerned with the drug itself, so the side effects, will they be on a placebo, so they vary based on your experience of clinical trials. Now this section here, we're going to look at those that have actually proactively tried to enroll themselves on a clinical trial or their child on a clinical trial and have been unable to. So 29% have actively tried to enroll on a clinical trial and have not been able to. But what was interesting is that there is also a small there was also 9 respondents, so that's 6%, that would have liked to enroll in a clinical trial, but they did not attempt to because they knew that they would not meet the inclusion criteria. And looking at the main reasons for not being accepted on a clinical trial, first one was they did not meet the inclusion criteria and no spaces were left at the time of the inquiry. So when looking further at the why the inclusion criteria was not met, it was because they were either too old or too young. So age was the main reason why inclusion criteria was not met. Social media is the most important source of information for clinical trials. So 15 of the respondents who proactively looked for information on trials said that social media was their main source. In terms of how those who proactively attempted to enroll on a trial, so how they went about doing this, so they persistently emailed the clinician team and trial coordinators to get information and try to enroll on a clinical trial. But again, the main challenge that was faced was that they or their child in care did not fit the inclusion criteria. We asked how did not being able to take part in a trial make the person with Duchenne feel. These are some of the comments that we have. So helpless, upset, disappointed, like time is running out, angry, frustrated, heartbroken, disappointed with the unfair system, and absolutely devastated. We also asked how it made a carer feel if their child in care was not able to take part in a clinical trial. And again, some of the responses are quite understandable. Furious, they felt excluded, they felt helpless, frustrated with the entry criteria. They felt absolute devastation, somewhat resentful as a fundraiser that donates everything to research. Cross as I had not understood how to enroll for a trial and we missed out. Now this section looks at the barriers for taking part, the reasons why people do not want to. So the main barriers for not taking part in clinical trials are looking for a more suitable trial. It's interesting that living too far away from the trial sites came up as a barrier, whereas we did previously see that over 50% were prepared to travel to another location if it meant that they could access a clinical trial. And also the other reason was that the cost it would incur to participate they felt was too high. Finally, we asked for feedback on how to improve the clinical trial process. But before I share the results with you of this question, on behalf of Duchenne UK, I would briefly like to tell you about the DMD Hub, as the next slides will also show where the DMD Hub will assist in improving the clinical trial process. The DMD Hub, created by Duchenne UK and leading neuromuscular experts, is aimed at addressing the lack of clinical trial capacity in the UK. Working with stakeholders, the Hub will build on existing expertise to create a network of clinical trial sites which fits into Duchenne UK's broader mission that all patients with Duchenne are given the opportunity to take part in research. So going back to the survey, the areas where clinical trial process can be improved. So first of all, one of the sections was communication. So here some of the comments that we had were better communication from doctors, consultants, pharmaceuticals, better knowledge transferred to doctors, timely information, so not before or after a child has started or recruited. When we asked about how previously how a carer felt when their child was not able to take part in a clinical trial that they wanted to, one of the comments was that they actually missed out on a clinical trial because they were not aware of the process. The other one is update on trials at each hospital visit, a direct email sent to with trial status updates, charities to provide more information, better explanation of studies and their impact, updated list of current and upcoming trials, better awareness communication from consultants on how clinical trials are recruited, one clear message and update from all those involved, and also some communication from families so that they can share their experience of being on trials. The DMD Hub will be addressing the communication issues that have been mentioned here. There was also a request for child-friendly literature and surveys, some changes to the trial design and outcome measures, so abolish the 6-minute walk test, placebo, abolish it or make it very short and use natural history as opposed to placebo, better outcome measures, so upper body strength, a process, speed up the process, clearer ethical considerations when extending the trial. So for example, efficacy data available to make informed consent, consideration from drug companies into the unseen cost of clinical trials, for example, unpaid leave from work, additional childcare expenses for siblings, out-of-pocket expenses such as gifts, items to relieve boredom for the child whilst in hospital. Some policies on how far is too far when considering failed blood draws. Better access and availability of psychological support for child and family, ability rather than age for cut-off points, and children and adults on trials are treated well. Accessibility was also a very important area, so more trial sites, capacity have centres in Scotland, which the DMD Hub will be addressing. Trials held at local sites where people may be living in remote areas, accepting wider age range, more flexibility on non-ambulant options and include those that are not taking steroids. There was also some feedback on the Action Duchenne Registry, and that was to increase awareness of the registry, and also for the registry to update and inform of all trials and contact families more often, and all to ensure that the registry is kept up to date. The DMD Hub will be working with Action Duchenne to address these. Social media, something that somebody posted was they appreciated if families refrained from posting pictures of upset children on social media. And also finally the fair recruitment process. So it should not be who you know. Why are some people offered places and others are not? Fair in terms of location should not be based on geographic location, as people are prepared to travel to access sites. Clear guidelines and protocol that should be followed by all parties involved, and an opportunity to make coordinators, clinical trial nurses at each appointment if requested. Thank you. Just before I end, on behalf of Duchenne UK and Smart with Shiv, I would just like to thank all of you who assisted in putting the survey together, and also all of you who took the time to complete the survey. And also I'd just like to acknowledge the survey was designed by Alex Johnson from Duchenne UK and myself, but it was in consultation with fellow Duchenne Charities. So that included Action Duchenne, Alex's Wish, Duchenne Now, DMD Pathfinders, the Duchenne Research Fund, Harrison's Fund, Muscular Dystrophy UK, and also patients and caregivers across the Duchenne community, Emma Heslop from the DMD Hub, and industry and healthcare professionals. If you have any questions, you can contact Naomi Litchfield, directly at Duchenne UK, and Emma Heslop for any DMD Hub questions. Thank you.